Thank you, Madam Speaker. So the bill that's entitled Violence Against Women Act was passed in the House today, and I deeply regret it was not the kind of bipartisan bill that I feel like we should have had. I don't know anybody in this chamber that supports violence against women or who does not want to do what we can to stop it. We battled this out verbally in the Judiciary Committee, but it is so clear to me, having prosecuted sexual assaults, women who were battered, beat up badly by their husbands or partners, it is such an egregious thing. And I heard over and over as a felony judge in Texas about how traumatized the women were and potentially would be for the rest of their lives. And that there'd be, with counseling, they could work to avoid having the triggers that put them right back in the place where they were so badly abused. And more recent literature indicates that women who have been sexually assaulted seem to have a much higher number of times, apparently, more post-traumatic stress disorder after having been sexually abused than even soldiers have after combat. One suggestion in a study indicates that perhaps it's because soldiers are trained for what they go through, so perhaps that reduces the amount of PTSD. There's no adequate training to prepare a woman for the kind of abuse that so many have suffered. But one of the triggers that I'd heard about as a judge that could just trigger this trauma, reliving of the experience all over again, is a woman being in a confined space and having a biological man come in to that confined space. We've heard of women assaulting men who have done that. Some that may have been through sexual assault before. And I understand the idea of my colleagues across the aisle. They want to help avoid hurting the feelings of biological men who think they're women, or according to the latest rendition of DSM, the DSM-5, they're suffering from gender dysphoria, which is kind of the opposite of euphoria, but it basically is a confusion or a discomfort with one's biologically assigned gender. So I get it. You don't want to make them feel bad. You don't want to hurt their feelings. So to avoid hurting their feelings, we would put so many women, there were a lot of folks I've heard say, 1 in 4 women will be sexually assaulted. If that's true, then that means that those who voted for this bill today would seek to punish again and again and again women who have suffered the outrageous, egregious assault sexually or being battered with no way out. And when my friend across the aisle, Debbie Dingell, speaks of those fears and terrors as a child and abuse going on in the home, you know, my heart goes out to her and anybody who has suffered like that. But this is the United States Congress. Can't we have a bill that doesn't have a political aspect, that it just tries to do the right thing by women who have suffered from sexual assault or being battered, and let them have a confined space without a biological man being forced into their traumatized world? Couldn't we agree on that? And the answer is no. Debbie Lesko, my friend, colleague, also on the Judiciary Committee, has been such a victim. She had amendments. She spoke brilliantly about the suffering and what needed to be done to fix the bill. And yet, it was a political matter. It's too important that we not hurt the feelings of men who think they're women, and therefore we're just going to let those women have to suffer. They just need to get over their trauma, their PTSD. They're reliving the nightmare of a sexual assault over and over again as people with more regard for somebody's hurt feelings than someone else's, a woman's terror, forces them over and over through such terror time and time again. You know, when I read a story about a woman seeing a man and freaking out, starting to assault him. Now, if a woman has been through a sexual assault before, my heart goes to her, not for the guy that walks in and traumatized her so. And yet, the law, if the majority here has their way, that bill would become law, and those traumatized women would be traumatized, condemned to be traumatized repeatedly at the demand of the Democratic majority in Congress and House here. I really would have hoped we could have had a bill that we could all, of one accord, say this is right, this is the thing to do by women. But we can't get a bill to the floor to try to protect unborn women, unborn girls. You know, in China, the abortion rate of girls is dramatically higher than that of boys because they think they hadn't been like me and had 3 girls. They don't know how wonderful it is. So they think, gee, if I'm only going to be allowed to have one child, I'd prefer it be a boy. And there is outrageous discrimination, a real, true war on women going on in China. And China has yet to feel the destructive results of what they have required. But that's a war. Killing an unborn child because she happens to be biologically female. But we haven't heard condemnation about such practice in this Congress, and that is a legitimate war on women. Children that were never given the chance to live simply because, not to live outside the womb, simply because they are biologically women. Very tragic. And I hope the Senate will use some common sense and have a heart for the women who have been victims of assault. And I know I've seen it, I've heard it. As a prosecutor, I was frustrated by it, where a woman would come in, beat to a pulp, black and blue, all bruised up and scarred. You want to put her husband in prison forever, doing that to anybody, and especially a woman that could not defend herself. And time again, too often, the experts will tell you, those that prosecute a lot, the woman will come back and say, you know what, now that everything's healed, it's really my fault. And they have this idea that somehow they deserved that kind of beating when they didn't at all. And as a judge, there were so many times that I told young children that I know you could tell they blamed themselves for a sexual assault. Tell them, without the jury around, you need to understand this was not your fault. You didn't deserve this. You never did anything to deserve it. This was a crime committed against you. You were the victim, and don't ever think that you deserved it or you're the guilty party. Because it's amazing, some men have the ability to make their victims think they're the ones at fault. And yet, for those who suffer the trauma again, having a man confront them in a very confined space, they're going to be condemned to relive it over and over again. It is very unfortunate. Hopefully, wisdom will win out, and the Senate will help us have a bill that really considers the women and the damage done by the full complement, if you want to call it that, of this Violence Against Women Act as it was labeled. We've also heard repeatedly there's no crisis on the border. It's not a national emergency. This is a manufactured emergency. We've heard that over and over. We've seen the montages of the lamestream media saying that, oh, manufactured crisis, manufactured crisis. Apparently, Jay Johnson, former Secretary of Homeland Security, didn't get the memo that he was supposed to come forward and lie. So he actually said, yes, it's a crisis on the border. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's a crisis for our nation's security. And it is so out of hand. And I keep hearing every day from people whose jobs it is to protect America and to protect Americans, protect people that are legally here. But they are so busy having to get names, whether they're fictitious or not. Most of the time, there's no proper identification. You have to take the person's word, take the information on where they say they have relatives. I've pointed out before, but I've been there when, while they're going through questions with one end of the group, other end, they're moving kids. Why don't you take this kid? No, you take this kid, claim it's yours. And, oh, here, I'd rather have you take my address, I'll take your address. These were addresses, apparently, where the drug cartels needed them to operate either or work in their either drug trafficking, sex trafficking. And so, under the laws, the way they exist now, as the Border Patrolmen have said, you know, the cartels say we're the logistics. The drug cartels get paid, and they hire some person to bring them across the border. And the drug cartels, as I've heard them say out there in the middle of the night, when it's not on their list of questions to ask, but often it gets asked, how much did you pay to be brought into this country? And when the question is asked, where'd you get that kind of money? $5, $6, $7, $8,000. You don't have that. Where'd you get that money? Well, we got so much here, so much there, some sent from the U.S. Well, what about the rest? They're going to let me work it off when I get where I'm going. So then our own Homeland Security, our own HHS, they ship the drug cartels' future employees to the place the cartels want them to work. So I would hope that as people read stories, oh no, another meth lab busted, and this guy is part of the Mexican drug cartel, and it's not in Texas, then that's when people are should remember, oh yeah, that's right. We use tax money to send the cartel's future employees to the cities where they want them to work in sex trafficking or drug trafficking. I mean, an advanced civilization cannot continue to be or to reach its potential when we're bringing in the people and paying to put them where they can destroy the city, the state, and ultimately our country. This is a crisis. As I understand, down in the quadrant in Texas, especially down south of McAllen, where I've spent so many nights, you know, one was saying just in ours, we process 1,200 today, process 13,000 in about 10 days, one area. It's incredible. How can an intelligent civilization keep doing that to itself in the name of helping our country and helping our neighbors, when the fact is the most compassionate thing Americans could do for our neighbors in Mexico is to secure the border completely. Nothing comes in like drugs or women being sex trafficked. And no, the drug cartels are not going to take lightly to it. But you shut down the tens of millions of dollars every year that are flowing from the U.S. into Mexico that fund the mass corruption in Mexico. And Mexico, in my opinion, would become a top 10 economy in the world. They got some of the best natural resources in the world, a better geographic location than the United States, because they're between two continents and two oceans. Their trade ought to be astounding, and they got some of the hardest working people in the world. So why aren't they a top economy? It's because of all the money that flows across from the United States to the drug cartels in Mexico. And now a huge source of revenue for them is the money they get from sending people across by the thousands each week. It's insane. We can't prolong this little experiment in self-government when we're providing corrupt drug cartels with the method to take us down and to keep Mexico subjugated to their evil intentions. Article in CNS News by Terrence Jeffrey, April 3rd this year, points out that the 5 federal district court districts that sit along the U.S.-Mexico border were the top 5 districts in the country for the number of defendants they convicted and sentenced to imprisonment in fiscal year 2018, according to the data published by the Administrative Office of U.S. Courts. Rather interesting chart here. When you see the Western District of Texas has had 7,126 individuals convicted as criminals and sentenced to prison. The Southern District of Texas, 5,939 people convicted as criminals sentenced to prison. Southern District of California, very close, 5,470 convicted criminals sentenced to prison. So it isn't just a wrist slap, sentenced to prison. You got the District of Arizona, 4,378. District of New Mexico, 3,923. Of course, Florida is behind them, and there's a lot of people coming in illegally there, but it drops off so dramatically. So you see a bigger number of these 30 top sentencing courts have 700 or less, and the Western District of Texas has 7,000. So why is this? It's because they're border courts, and they are dramatically affected by criminals coming across our border. And as I understand it, one of the MS-13ers that was caught, supposedly for every person we catch coming in illegally, there are many times that many that are coming in that we don't catch. No reason to doubt that that's true about gang members, gangsters, part of MS-13. But why are we allowing this to go on for ourselves? You know, the old saying in Washington is, no matter how cynical you get, it's never enough to catch up. And the more you hang around this town, the more you see there's something to that. Could it be that a majority in the House don't want to stop this because the thinking is these may be our future hope for being in the majority and electing a president? Heaven help us if that were the case. That power is more important than preserving a union where freedom once abounded. Of course, it could never adequately abound as long as there was slavery. And just finished a book about the miracle of Yorktown, focused largely on George Washington. And we know he ended up, though he's from a state that prohibited the freeing of slaves, he freed the slaves in his will. But it wasn't until Martin Luther King, John Lewis, and others withstood tremendous oppression in order that a white Christian boy like me could grow up and treat my brothers and sisters like brothers and sisters. So we made great progress, and then it seemed like just as we get to the 60s and the Constitution finally is meaning what it says, we start moving in a direction that most civilizations, when you read their history, actually we're moving them to the dustbin of history. Here we accomplished so much, and freedom was, we spread it around. The Civil Rights Act helped with that. And now we're going to punish women who have been victims of assault by forcing them to endure men coming into their private spaces. We're going to take a country where massive amount of crime is occurring on our border, in our border areas. We're overwhelmed with people that don't understand that there's a lot of education and a lot of work involved in order to preserve self-government. So it's not unusual to see socialism become so popular as an idea. It sounds wonderful. Everybody's going to share and share alike. But then you dig down and you find out historically you can't have socialism, you can't have communism unless you have a big, powerful government strong enough that it can take from those who earned things and give it to those who didn't without their permission and punish them if they try to object. That takes a big, strong government. And our founders found, actually, if you let people keep what they earn, put a small tax on it so you keep order in the country, that is far more productive. That's how the United States has been the greatest economy and still is in the world. But those freedoms are going away. We're no longer ranked as the freest country in the world. And as those freedoms diminish, shouldn't be a big surprise that freedoms are diminishing as people that don't understand what it takes to preserve liberty and self-government come in unabated virtually. We're not stopping people from coming in. And I'm hopeful, prayerful, I hope that we will be able to have our government do what has not been done, as far as I know, since Woodrow Wilson, and that is have people on the border use non-lethal means and say, you're not coming into our country illegally. We ought to have a bipartisan bill passed very easily with regard to asylum that says you can't come into the United States and claim asylum. You got to go to the nearest embassy or an American embassy somewhere to claim asylum. But if you come into the country illegally and your first act in America involves breaking the law, then we're not going to allow you to apply for asylum. And you would see these massive caravans stop overnight. That's why there is such fluctuation. Earlier last year, numbers were way down. People in other countries thought Trump was going to stop them, that we had a president that wanted to do all he could to stop illegal immigration, secure the border. But by the time they found out that his party was not going to be in the majority in the House, and that people said they want to eliminate all barriers and let people in, anybody that wanted to come here, not just the over 1 million that we give visas to, then the numbers picked up. And when they got word that if you have a child, whether it's yours or somebody else's, it doesn't matter, that gets you into the country and keeps you in the country. Get a child, bring a child. That's the thing to do. It's really outrageous what that has done to children. Now, they're an important commodity to the drug cartels. Make sure whoever you are, wherever you're coming from, even if you're an MS-13er, bring a kid with you, bring a child, because the United States made such a big deal about we won't separate children from parents, even though to American citizens, we separate children from parents every single day of the year, because in America, at least in the past, we didn't believe in putting children in confinement for crimes their parents committed. As a judge, I don't know how many warrants I signed, but would never allow a child to be incarcerated because of the alleged crime of their parents. We don't do that. So we separate children from their parents every day in America, in every county in America, in every state in America. Happens all the time because we don't punish children for the sins of their parents. But once word got out that you come to America illegally with a child, you got a good chance of staying in, claim asylum, courts are backed up, and you got a good chance of staying for years. And once you're here a number of years, just don't show up for your asylum hearing, and they won't know where you are, and you'll be in good shape. It's got to stop. The American people expect us to protect them, protect the Constitution, and we have not done a good job of that, because there seems so often, right here in this room, more devotion to people that hate America, that still want to come here, than there is to those who are legally here that are saying, I don't want to be a victim of a crime. Would you please protect me from people coming in illegally that may commit a crime against me? And it shouldn't even have to be said, but because we have so many lamestream media folks who either are liars by trade or simply that ignorant, no, all immigrants are not criminals or people looking to commit crimes such as robbery, rape, destruction, murder, but they do happen. And when you look at the percentages of people in our federal prison who are in the country illegally, an objective bystander looking on would go, why is this country doing that? Why are they letting all these people in illegally when they may have 20-25% in their prison who are there because they're in the country illegally? Why are they letting that go on? And the only answer from an accurate cynic would be, well, it's for politics. You think it's good for one political party, so they keep it up. That is so dramatic, such a dramatic demonstration of where the real problems are in this country. And I've heard my friend, now Senator Marsha Blackburn, point out every city in America is now a border city because of all of the illegal aliens that they're having to take care of. But article in the Federalist by John Daniel Davidson, April 4th. It's actually his testimony before the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. But he says, I visited a migrant respite center in McAllen, Texas, run by Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley, charitable arm of the Diocese of Brownsville. Sister Norma Pimentel helped establish the center in 2014 at the height of the unaccompanied minor crisis, when Immigration Customs Enforcement was overwhelmed with thousands of children and teenagers turning themselves in to U.S. Border Patrol agents. At that time, the center was receiving between 60 and 100 migrants a day, nearly all of them families from Central America. Here's how it worked. Every afternoon, ICE dropped off the families at the Greyhound bus station downtown, about a mile from the respite center. Greyhound employees would call the center to let them know the migrants were there, and the center would send vans to pick them up. Once at the center, the children would be sent to a separate room for a hot meal while the parents took turns working with volunteers to get in touch with friends and family members all over the country. Or as we've seen, sometimes those are not friends and family, they're people to which the drug cartels have ordered them. The goal was to get them all bus tickets and get them on their way that same day, usually later that evening, because the next day there would be another group of families coming in, and there simply wasn't space for more than a couple dozen people to spend the night there. This wasn't some gleaming facility. The center occupied one half of a rundown commercial building consisting of a large multi-purpose room, bathroom, a shower, small kitchen, separate room for the makeshift cafeteria. There was an area in a corner of the main room cordoned off for young children to play and a large stack of blue plastic mattresses in another corner. Anyway, in December, the diocese moved the center to a larger location, former nursing home, about 16,000 square feet. That's because the number of migrants turning up at the bus station skyrocketed. Today, the new respite center is receiving about 800 people a day. 800 people a day, sometimes more. Last Sunday, 1,300 people were dropped off there and at other shelters around town. I mean, this is what's going on our border. When we are the most generous country in the world, some people even in this room will shout, you know, we're a nation of immigrants. That's right, and that's why we're the most generous country in the world when it comes to giving free passes into America. Nobody gives 1 million or more visas for legal entry into their country. Nobody. Not these countries that are geographically bigger, not countries that have a number of times the population. No, nobody is that generous as we are with letting immigrants in. So it's outrageous to say because we want to limit those coming in to the most generous number in the world that we say come in legally. What's wrong with that? As has been said before, a nation with no borders will not be a nation much longer. Not for long. But we find out, yeah, it is a moneymaker. It's a moneymaker for the drug cartels. Some people profit off the people coming in here illegally. The people that work here, either from drugs or legitimate businesses, they send an awful lot of money home. And that's the kind of people we want, people that care about their families, want to help them provide, make their way. That's a very noble thing to send money home to family. Unfortunately, that's not all the people that are coming in these days. I want to touch on one other matter. That's with regard to the special counsel. I know there are people in the House and Senate say, oh, you know, Robert Mueller is the gold standard when it comes to prosecutor. I'd submit that's some pretty tarnished gold with an awful lot of impurities, speaking metaphorically. So, I wasn't surprised when we learned that the Mueller report indicated really there's no evidence. There were plenty of evidence Russians were trying to get the Trump campaign to conspire with them. No evidence they did conspire with the Russians. And through the years of questioning Robert Mueller in our committee and doing a lot of research on the man, it would explain why I was so upset when he was appointed as special counsel, because I wanted somebody that would be fair and investigate all parts. But when we look back now, we see all the indictments that came as a result of having a special counsel. Not one single one of the indictments involved a conspiracy of any kind between anybody at the Trump campaign, including our president, and Russia. What we have learned from all the evidence we've gleaned in committee and in public is that there was a conspiracy, and it involved top people at the Department of Justice. It involved top people at the FBI. It involved the Clinton campaign. It involved Fusion GPS. It involved a foreign agent named Steele. He's a foreign agent. And by the way, our great Justice Department, such as it is or was in the last couple of years, never bothered to tell the FISA court that this man has no credibility with the FBI. We have stopped using him as an agent of our government, the foreign agent that he is, because he's not trustworthy. Never bothered to tell the judge that. And I don't know if it was one FISA judge or more, but the fact that the FISA judges, nobody has punished any of the applicants or affiants that have come in and sworn before them that this is true to the best of their knowledge. That was a lie. They didn't give the judge the best of their knowledge. It was a lie. And they knew it. And they did it 4 times. I've lost respect for whoever in the FISA court would not call those lawyers in or the FBI agents and said, you lied to me when you didn't tell me the full truth. You committed a fraud on my court, and now I need to decide how long I'm putting you in jail. They hadn't done that. That tells me we either need to get rid of the FISA courts or we need to have such a big overhaul, because they've gotten too comfortable in that star chamber, and I know all of them haven't, because I know there's some good judges that have been nominated, confirmed by the Senate, and sit in federal benches. I know there are plenty of good ones. Got too many good friends not to know that. But we at least have some who don't care when they're lied to if it furthers their own political ideas. Because that's the bottom line. Why would the FISA court or courts that have been lied to, had fraud against the court, why would they not have already punished the people that committed the fraud against their court? Seems to me it's got to be one of two reasons. They must be dishonest people, therefore they don't mind being lied to. Or two, they were so politically aligned with the people that were committing the fraud upon their court that they're fine with the fraud because it helped accomplish their political agenda as well as the ones who committed the fraud. We need to do something about the FISA courts. It's a real problem, and I know there are a lot of people who think, well, no, it's not really a problem because it's only been abused against Republicans. And we hate Donald Trump, didn't want him to be president, and so it's okay for them to abuse the FISA court system and the warrant system and the First and Fourth and Fifth and Sixth Amendments. It's okay to abuse those because we don't like the people being abused. But there's a reason that we have an adversarial system. With all its flaws, it's the best there's ever been anywhere when it comes to justice. And we're not supposed to allow the kind of thing that has now happened. And I was not surprised when Mueller couldn't help himself, Weissman couldn't help himself. Yeah, the evidence is not there to prosecute anybody, but we want you to know we're not exonerating them. Well, that's not a prosecutor's job. If a prosecutor learns that a crime is most likely probably been committed, that a person is probably committed, well, when they find out a crime's been committed, they look for a person who probably committed the crime. That's a job. And when you find the person, you gather enough evidence that you can have probable cause that they committed the crime. You get them indicted, you pursue them, prosecute them, convict them, sentence them. That's how it's supposed to work. A prosecutor is not supposed to ever go into something to exonerate somebody. You don't go into it looking for evidence that exonerates somebody. You're looking for evidence that shows they're guilty. And if you don't find evidence that establishes they're guilty, then you're supposed to move on, although Mueller's had a problem with that. We also have seen the history, whether it was Comey admitting that it sounded like he admitted a crime because he leaked information that he knew should not have been disclosed to a professor so that he would get it to the New York Times so that they could have a justification for appointing a special prosecutor. Wow. You got 18 U.S.C. 1905, disclosure of confidential information. That's a general provision. It's a felony to disclose confidential information. You got other laws. Well, this from the DOJ, their own regulations. If you look at 1.7.110, says it's against the law to disclose classified information to someone not authorized to receive it. But that's gone on during the years Mueller was head of the FBI. I've had FBI agents make clear, no way we could prosecute a member of Congress without the knowledge and okay of the director of the FBI. That would be Mueller when they were pursuing Ted Stevens, senator. They fabricated a case against the man. He had evidence he was not just not guilty, but completely innocent. But you do raids, you gather up all the evidence that would show somebody is innocent, completely innocent, 100% innocent, and you don't let them have all their stuff back, and you manufacture evidence. And you threaten a witness to get them to lie so you can convict somebody. And that happened to Ted Stevens. I first heard when, he had added $700,000 addition to $700,000 addition to his home, something like that. Going, well, he should have known better than that. Sure, you're going to try a guy for that. Well, it turns out he overpaid. He even told the contractor, just cash my checks. I have to overpay because they're watching everything I do, and I got to keep my nose clean. And they still went after him and convicted him immediately before an election that he narrowly lost. Thank God there was an FBI agent with a conscience that did an affidavit, so the judge found out that the prosecutor, the FBI, had framed Ted Stevens for a crime he didn't commit. Those people should have been disbarred. They should have been thrown out of the FBI, but the only guy forced out was the one that did the affidavit, because Mueller obviously had to be done with his knowledge that you run the guy off that had a conscience and reported it to the court, and you keep on the FBI agent that helped fabricate the case against the longest-serving Republican in the Senate at the time. He wouldn't have been on that plane where he was killed if it hadn't been for Mueller's FBI and the framing of Ted Stevens, so he lost his seat in the Senate, even though he's later exonerated. And of course, you know, we have these repeated examples. I'm not going to go back into the Whitey Bulger situation when Mueller was in Boston, but, you know, Kurt Weldon, serving here in the House, he was giving speeches right here over and over about the FBI could have stopped 9/11, and I didn't know what he was saying, whether it was true or not. Talked about the program Able Danger, but I sure did feel like Mueller needed to respond because this was a serious allegation against his FBI. Unbeknownst to me, he was going to respond, but not with a statement that Kurt Weldon was wrong. No, what they did, and I put the story, I've got a lot of examples. I was doing an op-ed so people would know some about Mueller that I know and have found out and read about. And anyway, I started an op-ed, and I let my friend Sean Hannity know I'm doing an op-ed on Mueller, and normally papers don't want 500, 800 words max for an op-ed, and I'm already at 2,000. Sean said, just do it. And, it doesn't make me a dime, in my case, as a member of Congress, but felt like the story needed to get out. So Sean says, well, yeah, we can put it up on the internet. People can download it, and it ended up being 48 pages. But one of the things I brought out was Curt Weldon's situation. So I'll read from the story that I included. This was from an article by WND. Each of Weldon's 10 previous re-elections had been by sizable margins. Polls showed he was up by 5 to 7 points in fall 2006. 3 weeks prior to the election, however, a national story ran about Weldon based on anonymous sources. They had to have come from the FBI. That an investigation was underway against him and his daughter, alleging illegal activities involving his congressional work. A week after the news story broke, alleging a need to act quickly because of the leak. And see, this is typical for Mueller and his crime team. They leak information and then tell the judge, we got to do something quick because this information is getting out there. Yeah, you leaked it. Just like when they used this dossier. I used to have respect for dossiers. Now it's a pejorative, but prepared by a foreign agent named Christopher Steele, hired by the Clinton campaign, using Fusion GPS, using the others like Nellie Orr, wife of FBI top official Bruce Orr. And they use this guy's dossier and information of Christopher Steele's dossier, as fabricated as it was provided to a reporter who did a story about it, and it was one of the other frauds upon the court. They tell the court, see, not only do we have this information from Christopher Steele, a foreign agent that's untrustworthy. Unfortunately, they didn't tell the judge that. They knew it, but they didn't tell it. And they said, and look here is a story that also has this information that corroborates Christopher Steele. Not bothering to tell the judge, actually, that's Christopher Steele corroborating Christopher Steele. And he just talked to people in Russia. So you got a foreign agent using foreign agents, who knows who they work for, maybe Putin. So foreign agent using foreign agents in Russia as he worked for the Clinton Foundation, Fusion GPS, to prepare opposition research that was not true against the opposing campaign for president. So they didn't bother to tell the judge then. Here in Curt Weldon's case, must have been somebody from the FBI leaked that they were going after Curt Weldon. That helped them get the media involved and a judge to sign off on a warrant. And gee, when they show up early in the morning, 7 a.m. before business, on a Monday morning, local TV and print media had all been alerted about the raid. Well, who would have done that? But the FBI agents, or maybe Mueller or one of his minions. They leaked to the media. They're all out there. And they were in position to cover the story. Within hours, Democratic protesters were waving caught red-handed signs outside Curt Weldon's district office. But it turns out there was no follow-up, there was no questions, no grand jury investigation, nothing. That's why they later called Curt Weldon family and said, hey, all that stuff we got in our raid, you know, you can come get it. Apparently we didn't use it in a grand jury investigation. No, they just used it to defeat Kirk Weldon. So it shouldn't be a surprise when Mueller's report said, yeah, you know, we didn't have evidence of a crime by the Trump administration or Trump campaign regarding collusion, any of that, but we didn't exonerate him. Well, no, that's not your job. Of course you don't exonerate somebody. But as special counsel, it sure seemed like, just like Comey, these guys that were all in tight. You know, Comey, great article some years back about basically he and Mueller joined at the hip. What a great gift for Mueller, though. He's begging President Trump to appoint him again back to being director of the FBI after Comey was fired based on Rosenstein's memo. And the president lets him know, no, I'm going to give you a job. 24 hours later, he grabs a job that will allow him to go after the man that wouldn't hire him as FBI director. Mueller, if he had any sense of decency, he would have told Rosenstein, look, you know, you and I, Rosenstein, Rob, we were involved in the original Russia investigation when we know Russia was trying to get our uranium illegally. We really shouldn't be involved in this Russia investigation that may bleed over. The president was supposed to investigate. He wouldn't hire me yesterday. That'll look bad. But you would have thought a man of decency would have recused himself, which Mueller did not do. There were so many reasons for both him, Rosenstein, and certainly Weissman. They were all involved in that original Russia investigation on uranium that they put a lid on so that the sale could go through. Because let's face it, the Clinton Foundation wouldn't have gotten that $145 million from the people profiting from the uranium sale of U.S. uranium ultimately to Russia. Wouldn't have happened. But Mueller not only did not recuse himself, he accepted the job and immediately went about hiring people that hated Trump like he did. That's not the mark of a real man of justice, a real person of justice. And he had a policy that when he was FBI director, 5-year up or out policy, caused us to lose, as was previously reported, thousands and thousands of years of experience. Why? If you got people experience, they can tell you when you're screwing up, doing something wrong as FBI director. He just wanted young people that would salute the flag and do whatever he said. Very unfortunate. So he brought down Ted Stevens. He brought down Kirk Weldon. And what about Dr. Stephen Hatfield? I mean, the story was President Bush called him in. There's no evidence that Hatfield had anything to do with this anthrax. Why are you still after him? Are you sure he's the guy? And Mueller said, I'm 100% certain, is what was reported. And that's because, as the saying goes, normally Mueller, well, I guess the saying is, often wrong, but never in doubt. He tells President Bush, I'm 100% certain. Yes, Hatfield's the guy. He wasn't the guy. And that's why it cost the government $6 million or such settlement for destroying his life. You look at Scooter Libby. Scooter Libby was framed, let's face it. And there's a great story explaining all that. And in fact, how Judith Miller was manipulated. That poor person had even suffered as a result trying to do the right thing. But she was ultimately persuaded that Scooter Libby said something he didn't. And she later, as it said, when Miller read Plame's own memoir, and there discovered that Plame had worked at a State Department bureau as a cover for a real CIA role, That discovery, in Mueller's words, left her cold. The idea that the Bureau in her notebook meant CIA had been planted in her head by Fitzgerald, by the FBI. It was a strange word to use for the CIA. Reading Plain's memoir, Mueller realized that Bureau was in brackets because it related to her work at the State Department. In other words, she shouldn't have testified against him, against Scooter Libby. She was set up and manipulated, and as a result, a good man's life was destroyed. But you'll find Mueller never apologizes when he always gets his man. It's just sometimes it's wrong. But it needs more investigation, not the Trump administration, but Mueller. And with that, I yield back.